Hello again. I'm John Shrader, and welcome to the Soccer Media Podcast, our weekly look at the soccer media business and the business of soccer. For those of us of a certain age, well, we know about Clyde Best, the Bermudan who became the first black man to start a game in the English Premier League in the late 1960s, and then came to America in the mid 1970s in the nascent days of the North American Soccer League. He remains a legend in Bermuda, of course, and at West Ham and in Portland and in other places. And Clyde Best is the focus of a new documentary film titled Transforming the Beautiful Game, The Clyde Best Story. It's a film that looks at not only Clyde, but at the broader place of race in football in the world. The executive producer of that film is Dan Egan, and he's with us on this episode of the Soccer Media Podcast. He is the executive producer, writer, director, and probably picked up the trash and closed up the boxes of all the equipment as he was making this film. Dan Egan, the executive producer of Transforming the Beautiful Game, The Clyde Best Story, which premieres March 25th in London. And he's been good enough to spend a little time with us to talk about this film. Dan, thanks.
Great to see you, John. How's things?
It's good, good. I watched the film, one of the early cuts of the film. I enjoyed it very much. Good job. You put a lot of work into this project, and we're going to talk about some of that stuff. But maybe the place to start here is you kind of have a larger theme that we'll get to, but why Clyde Best and why now?
That's a great question. Clyde is the most impactful sportsman you never knew. As a 17-year-old boy becoming the first black superstar of the modern TV era in England, Clyde really broke the color barrier in what is now the Premier League. And as a 17-year-old boy, that's quite a feat considering the time in London, the racial tension in London and around the world that Clyde did it on without really any help, without any support, without any fanfare. He just traveled from Bermuda to the London on a one-way ticket and went straight to the first team, first division for West Ham United. And really the whole idea of overcoming the idea of from a small place, a big thing happens was really the motivation for telling the story. And the fact that nobody knows the story, very few people really know the true story of Clyde Best and what he achieved.
Have you heard from a lot of the old school North American Soccer League people? You interviewed a number of the old school NASL folks, and have you heard from them and say, hey, thank you for giving us some love here?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the story is the NASL, because of course, my generation, we play soccer because of the NASL. We follow it today because of the Cosmos and the Rowdies and the Timbers and everything that I grew up with in the 70s. And I often, the NASL is dismissed as an all-star league. It's dismissed as, there were has-beens. But we're talking about the biggest names in European soccer coming to play in America. And the fact that the league was built on the back of the black and brown players from the islands, South America, and Africa, and then the legends were sprinkled in on top. And here you have a Clyde Best who overcame everything he did in London, becoming sort of the Pele of Tampa, the Pele of the Portland Timbers. And he represented both, right? He was from the islands. He was a black player and he was a legend. So it's interesting from that point of view.
One of the great lines in the film, I think it's used a couple of times, is Clyde Best says, Pele said, I'm the king and you're the prince, or something like that, after they played against each other, after Best played against Pele.
Yeah. It's a phenomenal story, right? Because as Clyde, as 18 in his first summer with West Ham United, they come to the States to play and they play against Santos. And Pele scores 2 goals and Clyde Best scores 2 goals. And in the headlines, it didn't even mention the teams. It just said Pele 2, Best 2. And really, Pele recognizing Clyde in that way says a lot, because Pele was really seen as a universal player. He was, the king. He was Pele, who was from Brazil, but Clyde was seen as the black player. And for Pele to call that out and make that statement is really quite something.
You know this in the broadcast business, we call this a tease. We're going to talk about Clive Charles, who is beloved, the late Clive Charles, beloved by almost everybody in American soccer. Anybody who was anywhere near the sphere of Clive Charles recalls him as being just an absolutely heartwarming, awesome human being and a really good coach. But the story of the Charles family and Clyde Best is awesome, and we're going to get to that in just a couple of minutes. But let's go back to the island. Let's talk a little bit about Clyde Best. He does say in this film, quote, "Everybody wants good footballers. No matter which part of the world you're from, they'll come and get you and find you." And but they sort of found him, but he sort of found them. Give us an idea. Let's go back to that 17-year-old at Bermuda.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, the story in Bermuda, because, as you know, the population is only 60,000 people. It's a very small island, but there's a lot of talent on the island. And in 1967, a 15-year-old Clyde Best and his national team, the Bermuda national team, win a silver medal in the Pan Am Games, losing in the finals against Mexico. They upset the U.S., they upset Trinidad and Tobago, and they meet Mexico in the finals. And they go to a 0-0 draw, and then it goes into OT, and Mexico eventually wins. But that team in Bermuda, Randy Horton, Gary Darrell, Sam Newson, the Cat, they all went on to play. And they played in the NSAL, and the 15-year-old Clyde Best really, scoring a couple goals in the tournament. That's what got him noticed, and that's what the head coach eventually went on and recommended him to Ron Greenwood at West Ham.
What made Clyde Best and his father believe that he should get on a plane at 17 years old and head to London, where he had never been? And there's some fun recollections about how he ended up actually in the Charles household. But there's what made them think that this 17-year-old kid was ready to go there? Was he mature enough to do that?
Yeah, well, that's that comparison we make in the movie is that Jackie Robinson was 27 years old.
Yeah.
Here we have a 17-year-old boy without the support of the team, without the support of the league, about to do something that people didn't think was possible. And like Clyde says in the movie, he always says, "I would have gone to Timbuktu to play." Clyde wanted to play, and I think it was a bit of destiny. His father understood Clyde's talent. He had thought originally to bring him to Barbados to be a cricket player. And it was on that trip to Barbados where Clyde, said, "No, I want to play football." And the fact that he was just head and shoulders above, already great players in Bermuda, I think made it possible. And when you think about, he's a huge man. He's, 6'4". He's a big guy. He's strong. He could jump. He was fast for a big guy. And we track it all the way in the movie to back to when he was 10, 12 years old, and he was watching West Ham on TV, and he says to his brother, "One day I'm going to play for that team." So there was a lot of fate involved. And I think when they put him on the plane on a one-way ticket, they didn't know what to expect. And neither did Clyde, and neither did the world.
This is 1968 into 1969, and we know what was going on in America in the 1960s and into the 1970s. Could it help us understand the tenor, the atmosphere, the sort of racial conditions of London when this teenager shows up there?
Well, it was harsh. There was a movement at the time, a far right politician advocating for everybody from the islands to go home, to go back where they came from. Of course, the Windrush generation had come to London and the UK to rebuild it after the war. And as they started to grow their families and move into the neighborhoods, there was a lot of resentment against the blacks in London at the time. Clyde wouldn't have known any of that when he arrived in London. And West Ham didn't greet him. There was no representative from West Ham at Heathrow. Clyde didn't know even anything about the tube or how to get on the train. And of course, he got off at the wrong tube stop. And he, instead of getting off at Upton Park, where the stadium was, he got off at West Ham and stood in the rain all day. He was the only black face in an all-white neighborhood. And when you think about even today, sending teenagers into that sort of environment, you would wonder, is it going to be okay? I've had many people tell me that they've had those experiences or they wouldn't send their child into that situation today.
So serendipity is a word that's so easy to use, but I think it's applicable here. Somehow, Clyde Best ends up in the home of the Charles family in London. And if you could help us understand that story, I think it's really valuable to this entire story.
Yeah, I mean, it just goes to show you, how the world can unfold in front of you sometimes. A complete stranger approached Clyde at the end of the day and said, "Sonny, are you lost?" And Clyde said, "I'm here for my trial with West Ham." And the guy kind of joked. He said, "Well, aren't we all, Sonny?" And then he says, "Well, come with me." And he took him to the only other black family in the neighborhood. It was about a quarter mile away, and it was the Charles family. And of course, in that home, there were two boys that played football for West Ham. There was John Charles, who they nicknamed Johnny the One because he was the first black captain of any international London English team. He was a little bit older. Johnny Charles would have been in his mid-20s when the 17-year-old Clyde showed up. And the younger brother, Clive Charles, was 14 when Clyde Best showed up. And Mrs. Charles welcomed him into the house like he was one of their own. And Clyde lived in the couch for 6 years and stayed and became his surrogate family. And not a lot of people in this country realize the relationship between Clyde Best and Clive Charles. And really the influence of Johnny Charles on both Clive and Clyde, because Johnny had appeared in the first division a couple times. He had really blazed the way for what Clyde Best would eventually do. And he consulted to Clyde on fitness and skills. And when you think about the Charles family and the conversations around the dinner table about race relations, about how to do this, it's fascinating to daydream about what those conversations would have been like. And then, of course, on Easter Sunday, 1972, it's the first time West Ham ever starts three black players in one game: Clive Charles, Clyde Best, and Addie Coker. And Addie Coker went on to play for the U.S. And it has 5 or 6 caps for the USA. So that was quite a thing, because you had Clyde Best at the time was 21, and Clive Charles and Addie Coker were both teenagers. As a matter of fact, Addie Coker was younger than Clyde Best when he got his debut in 1972.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. There's a really poignant part of the film where Coker and Best visit the gravesite of Clive Charles, who passed away in 2003 of prostate cancer. Championship coach at the University of Portland. He coached both the men and the women for almost all of the years he was at Portland. And again, Clive Charles is remembered. And again, I don't think a lot of people who've watched soccer, paid attention to it in the last decade, 2 decades, 4 decades, know as much about Clyde Best as I learned actually in this film. Dan Egan is the executive producer of the film, Transforming the Beautiful Game, the Clyde Best Story. Before we leave the Charles family in London, I want to make sure I understand this correctly. He became a big star at West Ham, and he was still sleeping on the Charles couch, right?
He did, yeah. He stayed. Clyde is that way, the family atmosphere. Of course, I bet the cooking was great from, Mrs. Charles. And yeah, he stayed in there. He stayed on the couch for 6 years. Um, and so much, when you think about this, what Clive Charles went on to do in America, he would not have been given the opportunity to do that in the UK. I mean, even today, there's so few black coaches at the top level, right?
Hmm.
Never mind at a university level or the Olympic level. So it says a lot about the opportunity that was given to the NASL players when they came here to America and the impact they had on our game and our lives. When you think about the success of the Olympic teams and all of the success of the U.S. women's teams, people reflect on Clive Charles for that impact.
Hmm.
When I met Kobe Jones, he said that Clive Charles changed his life. It was the first time he had ever seen a black coach, and he was the most influential black coach he ever had. That those are important things, and we talk about that a lot in the film. If you can't see it, maybe you can't be it. And Clive Charles and Clyde Best became the thing that the world saw, and that other players could become.
Yeah, so Clyde Best becomes a star at West Ham, and then he realizes in the mid '70s that the party's over. I mean, they have a big championship match, and he's not even not even on the bench, and then ends up in Tampa in the North American Soccer League. Goes into his boss and says, "I got a chance to play in America," and his boss says, "Well, you probably should take it," basically, right? And so he ends up in Tampa, and then makes a really big mark in Portland, which is, I think most people who are listening or watching this know, is one of the great soccer cities in America. They call themselves Soccer City, and makes a big mark there. So describe a little bit for us, if you would, his journey to North America, why, and the impact he made here.
Well, when he was left out of the FA Cup finals in 75, um, there was no explanation given to Clyde Best on why he was not even part of the subs, and he watched the game from the stands. There's and even Clyde himself today is unsure of why that came to be. Um, but if you go back to 72, the first time three black players ever play in one game, you have to remember that that wouldn't happen again for another 6 years
Yeah.
in West Brom. So there was definitely a tone of racism existing, even in West Ham and throughout the league. And back then, a lot of the talk was, the players didn't have endurance; they couldn't stick it out. All these sort of things. That was never outly spoken to or said to Clyde Best, but I think he just read the room. Um, and he was up for a new adventure. I think one of the most poignant parts of the movie is when him and Mark Lindsay are leaving London and flying to Tampa. And Lindsay looks at Clyde Best and he's weeping. And Mark Lindsay is afraid that Clyde made the wrong decision. He says, "Are you all right, mate?" And Clyde basically says, "No, this is the happiest day of my life. I never want to play here again." When you think of all that pressure, the bananas, the monkey chants, the potential acid being thrown on Clyde Best, to finally go to a place to play with players that looked like him. And that's how he had grown up in Bermuda. And that's what the people have overlooked, that the North American Soccer League was one of the most diverse leagues in the world and welcomed diversity. And it was more diverse than the National Football League, more diverse than the Baseball League and the NBA. It was the North American Soccer League that really introduced inclusion, and diversity into pro sports around the world.
Yeah, and Best then plays in Tampa for a couple of years, and then let me help me with the math. Maybe 5 years in Portland, something
Yeah,
in that range,
yeah,
right?
played 6 years in Portland
Or
after
6 years.
And oddly enough, while Clyde would play in the summer in the North American Soccer League, he would go back to Europe and play
Hmm.
in the regular season and at the time for Feyenoord in Holland. It was a little cold for Clyde up there, but it was while he was in playing with Feyenoord that Clive Charles called him and said, "Hey, I'm interested in coming to America." And Clyde Best then helped bring Clive Charles to Portland, and that started the legacy that is Clive Charles in the Northwest.
Yeah, yeah. So, when asked you why Clyde Best, when did this project start? And and then how long did it take you to work on it? And how many people did you interview? All right, I'm sorry, I shouldn't ask three questions in one, but let's go. When did this project start?
Well, the project started in its existing form 4 years ago, really in late 21, early 2022. But it had started before that because I played in prep school with Jerry Best, Clive Best's nephew, in the middle of the woods in Maine at a small school called Bridgeton Academy. And so Jerry and I were very good friends. Jerry was the best player I had ever seen. The first day I met Jerry, he said, "Hey, Egan, your only job is to pass me the ball. My job is to score." And score he did. We won everything. We beat colleges. We won everything in 1983 in the middle of the woods of Maine at Bridgeton Academy. And I'm also a sailor, so I've sailed in and out of Bermuda my whole life. And every time I would sail in or out of Bermuda, I would keep in touch with the Best family. So I knew the Best family. And in 2016, 2017, I worked on the America's Cup in Bermuda for really over a year and a half. And it was during that time that Clyde Best would come and hang out with me at night. And we would sit on the veranda of the hotel and talk football, talk about his career, talk about North America and England. Um, and it was Jerry, in fact, that kept asking me, would I help his uncle? Would I consider doing the movie? And from there, it started to roll. But the interesting thing of fate, again, I called my old coach from 1983, and he said, "You should call another alumnus on island." And I called this guy Dennis, and it turned out that Dennis was Speaker Lister. He was a Speaker of House of Parliament in Bermuda, and his childhood hero, of course, was Clyde Best. And that's how the project really took shape, was through the initial grant from the government to make the movie.
So you proposed the idea to Clyde Best, or his nephew proposed the idea to you, and then you go to Clyde. When you say, "Clyde, we're going to spend maybe a couple of years working on this thing," what was his reaction?
Clyde thought that Jerry and I were crazy. Uh, to know Clyde Best, he's so humble and quiet. He doesn't really advocate for himself. He won't tell you his story. Um, he just wanted to play ball. He went and did what he did, and he never sought anything from it. He wanted to play, and he played for a long time, and he played all over the place. So it took a little time, I think, for Clyde to believe that this was going to happen. It took a little time for Clyde to understand that we weren't going to tell his story. We're going to tell his impact. We were going to tell his influence around the world in the greatest game in the world. Um, and that's when it started to take shape. You asked the question, how many interviews did we shoot? Way too many, John. We shot way too many.
Well, as anybody who's told a story knows, you better have too many than not enough. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. Well, and that we had to make some editorial decisions early on when we started to think about the film. Most documentaries might have 8 to 12 voices in a movie. Um, and in this one, I think we're up to 30 or close to 40 interviews in the film, and another 30 or 40 that didn't make the film. But we had to come to an editorial decision that we were going to use a lot of voices, that we were going to introduce a lot of people, because one, Clyde influenced a lot of people, but two, very few people could tell the whole story of Clyde Best from the point of view that it was a global thing that he did. And so we had to go around the world to get the global point of view.
Who who is the audience for this? I mean, anybody who's made any kind of story, produced any kind of story, hopes to reach a certain audience. Who is your audience?
Well, our audience, of course, we release now in just in time for the 2026 World Cup in North America. Um, and to have that happening, we're going to tour all the host cities in America with the film. And our audience is people who, one, love the game, two, love inspirational overcoming stories, and three, to really tell the history of the game in North America and around the world to the younger audience that thinks, oh, maybe Rio Ferdinand or is the beginning of history when it comes to football. And I think that this story inspires the youth to overcome themselves, to understand that things don't happen in a vacuum. And our audience is really, the people, I think, a little bit older that love Clive Charles, that know a little bit about Clyde Best, and understand the relationship of the thing, that soccer is a game that unites people. Clyde has been a uniter his whole life. He brings people together through the greatest game in the world. And this game influences the biggest number of people around the world. We're going to see that in North America this spring and summer. And our audience is there to, this is a love story to the game and the game's love story to Clyde.
And you mentioned Clive Charles, Clyde Best, and Addie Coker, 1972, the first time three black players started in a game in England, in the highest levels in England. Again, help us understand the relationship those three guys had beyond that game itself and on to the rest of Clive's life and up to today with Addie Coker and Clyde Best.
Well, West Ham United, of course, had a great academy, and West Ham stands on the forefront of race relations for football, really around the world. They had other black players, one which was Addie Coker, who started playing at the academy at the age of 15, I believe, or maybe slightly younger. He used to take the tube through 20 stops from Fulham to the East London to play. Really multiple days a week. And the first person he saw when he came to the West Ham Academy was Clyde Best. And, that was powerful. And then, of course, Clive Charles was sitting there too. And people knew of Johnny Charles, all from West Ham. So West Ham looked at talent, and they really focused on talent and the best players. 1972, when those three start in one game, it was a signal to the world that the game was changing. There were other great players, and they were black, and they were going to play in this league. But that wouldn't happen, like I said, till 1976 with the 3 Degrees, with Laurie Cunningham, Brandon Batson, and Cyril Regis. And when you talk to Brandon Batson, he says, well, it was Clyde Best. When you talk to Viv Anderson, he says it was Clyde Best. But the story is about television because the first time the match of the day shows in color, it's West Ham versus Liverpool, and there's a 17-year-old Clyde Best starting next to Sir Geoff Hurst, the only player ever to score a hat trick in a World Cup final and win. And that contradiction was broadcast into every home in the UK. And television, presenting Clyde as the first black superstar of the modern TV era is really etching his place in history. Because, yes, there were other black players that came before Clyde, but none were household names like Clyde Best. Every black boy around the country wanted to be Clyde Best, regardless of their team. And for this movie, we interviewed the first black player at pretty much every Premier League team in the UK. And it's fascinating when you talk to them and they describe for you what it was like for them as a young boy to see a young Clyde Best on television. So really the power of TV that transforms the way we think, the way we act, our culture, it really launched Clyde Best into the homes in England, and shouldn't be overlooked, the power of that. And then when you have Addie Coker and Clive Charles all in one game with Clyde Best, and Addie Coker scores in that game, and Clyde Best scores in that game, there's no denying that the black players belong in the league and should be given their chance.
And now I believe you used the stat, 43% of the players in the English Premier League are of color, mostly black. And that's really, I mean, this is Clyde Best Story, but fundamentally it is, in the bigger picture, a story about race in football and in soccer. And a couple of things, one of the people you interviewed said the ball tells the truth, which means if you can score, you're going to play. But we have to be 2 times better, but we had to be better than the best, even though the ball tells the truth. Women in sport will tell you the same thing. We have to be twice as good. We have to be better every single day, all day, even longer than the men. And the black players had to be better just to get noticed, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And to be given, and as we saw with Clyde's career, staying power. When you think that it took 6 years for the 3 degrees to come to West Brom and to really establish that. And one of the points, it's an interesting point, is that in 1972, they put the 3 best players on the field that day, you know, but in 1976, it became a little bit of a marketing campaign. So there's a shift from sport to entertainment that happens in those 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
And today we're living in the world of entertainment.
Yeah.
We're entertained by these sports, which is phenomenal, but there is a slight nuance to that shift.
Yeah, for those who want to understand the 3 degrees, because it's like musical, entertainment, celebrity, football, you can Google it. We don't have time to talk about it now, but it's a pretty interesting story as well that's referred to in this film, but it's not about that. I do want to talk to, before our time is up, Dan, the executive producer of the film, Transforming the Beautiful Game, the Clyde Best Story. And that is just a couple of structural things about the film. I think people who watch it will recognize, I think many will, the actor Tony D. Head, who's your narrator host. And I say narrator host. Give me an idea of what the sort of decision making was to have Tony Head kind of be your guide, your talisman through this story.
No, I love that. Clyde is so humble, he doesn't advocate for himself. So we needed an advocate in the movie. And Tony takes on the role of the advocate. And there's many connections between Tony and Clyde that is revealed throughout the film. But one, they're the same age. And Tony, growing up in Boston, one of the most racially dynamic cities in the country, who wouldn't leave his neighborhood as a teenage boy, when he hears that this teenage Clyde Best not only leaves his neighborhood, but leaves his country and goes into an all-white situation to play, Tony really wants to know more. He's intrigued by this. And then we go on the journey to figure out, how did he do it and what was it all about? And having an advocate as our narrator was really a structural decision to help the story move along and to take the pressure off of Clyde to do something he's naturally not basically built. His personality doesn't do it for that part.
Yeah, and anybody who has made a documentary film, whether it's 15 minutes long or an hour and 15 minutes long, not sure how long yours is, but it's not 15 minutes, needs visual support. So you had to, I'm sure, scrape everywhere, anywhere to get film, to get newspaper articles. Give us an idea of what that part of this journey was like.
Yeah, that's a great question. In Bermuda, there's a gentleman. Excuse me. There's a gentleman who kept scrapbooks of famous Bermudians that went on to do great things. And early in the process, I got handed 2 very large scrapbooks on Clyde Best, which was great. It was every headline you could ever imagine on Clyde Best. And that was really, really helpful. And then, of course, with the North American Soccer League and the expansion, how that dissolved, once we tracked down the footage, that was a huge asset to get. And then, of course, the BBC and ITV and everything in England is well documented. So there was a lot of archival footage, and that gave us confidence that we could get the goals and get the interviews. Interviews with Ron Greenwood, the manager of West Ham United, talking about the 17-year-old Bermudian. Interviews from Harry Redknapp, remembering the first day Clyde Best showed up at practice, and they didn't believe he was 16, 17 because he had a beard and he was a big guy. And really, the very first day of that he came to practice, the three stars from the English World Cup winning team from West Ham took their photos with Clyde Best. And all of these pieces started to come together. And you mentioned Pele earlier. Unfortunately, we missed Pele for an interview, which would have been amazing. All of this kind of gave us confidence that, yeah, this story is something we could visually tell and be engaging.
We've talked about some of the challenges and how you put this together. What was the greatest joy of all this? We all know how much hard work it is. I mean, it is like daily pounding to get this all put together. But in the end, as you look back, what is the joyful part of this process for you?
Well, it's a great honor to be entrusted with somebody's life story. And it's something I never taken lightly, that Clyde Best trusts me with his legacy and with his story. His family trusts me with the legacy and his story and his impact on the world. And that truly will be one of the greatest joys to me. And I honor that with the Best family. It's an honor to tell Clyde Best's story. It's a story that needs to be told. It's a story that impacts us for where we are, where we're going, and how we got here. Not only for North American soccer, but for English soccer and the world game. And unfortunately, we see a lot of abuse even today as we record. There's still issues around the world with racism in sport. And Clyde Best stands as a testament that you can overcome through excellence. That you don't need a social media platform to achieve, and the importance of mentorship, the importance that these teams, professional teams and club teams, provide for individuals as surrogate homes, as friends, as support, to reach your dreams at whatever level. And for me to see all that come together through the Clyde Best story is a joy. I've been a lifelong sportsman. I love my teams. I'm still connected with my teams. I'm still friends with all my coaches in skiing and in soccer and in sailing. And they've mentored me. They've helped me when I'm down, praised me when I was up, and corrected me when I was off track. And Clyde Best represents that to all of us. And it's a story that people should really sit down, and it will make them think, and it will hopefully inspire them.
What did the humble Clyde Best think of the film?
Clyde was that was great, because about a month and a half ago I flew to Bermuda to show him the movie, and it really made him think about Jerry, his nephew, and Jerry's path has been a complicated one, but to see that Jerry really did this for his uncle, and contributed to the story in that unique way, I think really hit home to Clyde. And Clyde became appreciated through this whole process. We flew around the world with Clyde to all the stadiums he played in Feyenoord and West Ham and Portland and Tampa and beyond. And I think for him to be appreciated in this way and to be honored in this way kind of helped him remember that, yeah, he did a great thing from a small place.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things in this film that will capture different kinds of folks, people interested in race and sport, people interested in English football, people interested in North American Soccer League, in American history, in American soccer history. And congratulations. I enjoyed the film and I enjoyed the conversation, and I appreciate you sharing with us what you've done and then how you've done it. Dan, thanks.
Thank you, John. And of course, you can find about a world tour at clydebest.com. Read about the backstory, the origin story, and where we're showing the film around the world. We appreciate it. Thank you very
Great.
much.
Thank you. Dan Egan is the executive producer of the film, Transforming the Beautiful Game, The Clyde Best Story. And maybe we'll refer to it as The Clyde Best Story as we continue. And he's been with us on the Soccer Media Podcast.